70% of businesses fail to scale because of the culture. Culture is your operating system. Culture is the sum total of the behaviors in your organization. It is what you tolerate. It is what you reward. It is what you promote. You cannot have too much change in one go because it destabilizes the team. Trust is really, really important. It's like the number one kind of growth driver.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Startup Scale Up People podcast. Remember to subscribe when you are, watching this episode. People always forget. Here you can learn how people build their dreams and lives and businesses and more. I'm excited to introduce today Sharon Palmer, the CEO of Humanity Works Consultancy. She is an award-winning culture and leadership advisory person who helps business to scale. She has been working for several years in this market, helping companies to scale from 100 million to 500 million ARR. She's also is an executive coach and keynote speaker on leadership, resilience, and culture, and non-executive director, bringing governance and culture and expertise to boards, and a former digital transformation and strategy leader working with global brands. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you, Mario. I'm a big fan of your podcast and of you, so I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you, Sharon. That's very kind. Well, you help companies to move from 100 million to 500 million, right? You are, I would say, like in mature companies, right? And I know that you had a lot of experience in corporate as well, because that's come from your background. But all this change that you do is driven by culture. That's what I understand so far, right? We've been talking about a little bit about this, in working events and also offline, right? Can you explain a little bit why culture is so important and how this helps companies to move from 100 million to 500 million?
It's a good question. So I think that in any organization, you're looking at various kind of growth drivers. You're looking at pulling on certain levers that will actually help a company to grow. And so as companies are scaling, from even from like zero upwards, they're looking in the beginning stages at like market fit and product fit. And one of the key growth levers is actually culture. And the reason why culture is so important within an organization is because culture at its very kind of basic level is the sum total of the behaviors in your organization. It is what you tolerate. It is what you reward. It is what you promote. Culture is your operating system. It's how work gets done. It's about who you hire and invite into the company on that journey. And where you are looking to kind of scale fast and drive, exponential growth in your business and have repeatability of success, you really need to have, therefore, a culture that will drive that growth for you. And it needs to be something that is designed, and it needs to be something that is very strategic. And there was a brilliant piece of research that was done by McKinsey, and they found that actually 70% of businesses fail to scale, not because of market fit, not because of product fit, it's because of the culture. And often I think that it's easy to think that if you just hire lots of great people and you put them into the organization, they'll just do the right things and the business will grow and everyone will get on fine. That's not at all how it works. If you want to actually have a culture that will drive the growth of your business because you're very outcome focused, which most organizations are, then you actually need a proper system that strengthens that culture that will take you from that 100 million to the 500 million. And all of these phases when you're scaling a business are really about maturity. Even the one from 0 to 30 to 60. They're all maturity phases.
You help companies to get more mature on how they manage culture. Culture means people, processes, and more and more and more, and all that. Like getting into these companies, I want to ask some tricky questions sometimes. Because, well, I was, I'm director of operations, for example, in companies with 10,000 people, 8,000 people, well, 8,000, but within my operation team were like around 5,000 or around 8,000. And I did a lot of changes as well, right? A lot of changes in the operating model, also in culture, improving quality of life. And I remember that I had a lot of challenges with unions, with other functions. This is changing culture is noisy because even if you're the director of operations, the general manager or the board or the CEO, they don't want to do the same changes. You cannot do it by yourself, right? It has to be something that has to cascade down from the top. And I remember it was very complicated, right? It was very complicated. So I can't imagine how it's going to be for companies who are like from 100 million to 500 million plus a global scale. Because I know that you've been working in, from globally in more than 40 companies, right? You've been doing all of this. How this starts? It starts from the CEOs or from like the board. Which is like the first approach that you generally have, and who approaches you and they say, oh, we have this problem. What do you think? How do you start the conversations?
That's a good question. So you're right. Culture is actually complex. Naturally, in organizations, particularly when they get much bigger, like you were just talking about, where you were scaling very large operations, you have then subcultures within the culture. So culture is never just one thing because it's lived experience of the organization. From my point of view, where I'm working with, say, SaaS and fintech businesses that are scaling from 100 to 500 million, typically the approaches will come from the revenue generating teams. So I might be in a SaaS company, I would often be approached by the chief revenue officer who is looking to drive a more united culture across the go-to-market team, or a chief sales officer who has noticed that their global sales leadership team, though has grown, actually they're not working effectively and they're not going to get to that next level unless they can be a more united team. Or it might be the CEO of a SaaS company who is trying to understand why the way that the business was running beforehand and the culture that they tried to build, which typically would be usually quite a family-led one, a more informal one, suddenly as they're getting to that 100 million ARR, those things aren't working anymore. And they can't understand why. Because it's the same people and they've got them to this stage, but they can't understand why they're not getting them to the next stage. And so the approaches can be varied, but all of them are coming to me because they either have a very specific goal. I might want to exit, or I might want to secure the next round of funding, or I need to make sure that we're protecting net customer scores because actually we want to refinance. All of them have a certain outcome in mind, but they know that the people side of it isn't functioning in the way that they need it to in order to get to that next stage of growth. Or they just see churn is too high, or they see that there's too much friction in the team and they're working against each other and that's slowing down the productivity. So they will be looking at often surface level metrics. My job is to come in and help them to analyze what is happening within their team, to then be able to, I call it the 4 steps to actually building a culture of united culture, a culture of trust and resilience. And step number 1 is I assess the systems that they have within their team, their department, within their organization. And I look to see whether they are actually going to deliver the outcome that they want. And if that's not there, then I design the growth system that will allow them to get there. I then coach them so that they have the tools at that leadership and leadership team level. And then I give them the tools that they can then put into the organization so that that culture then gets systemized across it, whether that's in a team, a department, or whether that's across an entire organization.
And do they have to, sometimes I feel when you're doing this, I had the experience, I had to fire a lot of people. If I want to do changes, unfortunately, not everyone is going to fit the new culture, the new operating model, the new changes. How because if you're talking with the chief revenue officer, right, or with the sales team or with specific functions, this also has to be talked, with the CEO again, with the board, with the other chiefs, because this is going to have a high impact. Do you help them as well to understand the methodology that you're applying, the benefits that this is going to have, and the impact, positive and negative, because I imagine at the beginning it's going to be a little bit of friction with the team, and it takes like a period of time, I imagine, to adjust, and then you start seeing the results. How does it work, that part of the work that you do?
Great question. So I'm very evidence focused. So everything that I do is led by data. So all of the assessments I'm looking at, where I'm analyzing their systems, their capabilities, I'm looking at actually, I call it the outside-in approach. I look at what the business has promised its shareholders, its stakeholders, and its customers. And then I work my way back from that. And I say, if your business is promising innovation to the market, do you have a culture that allows you to be innovative internally so that your market promise actually fits what you've actually said? I also look at, okay, what are your people and profit systems that are pushing people to do the things that they're doing that might be contrary to where you need to get to the next level? And I always say to the leaders that I work with, you cannot have too much change in one go, because it destabilizes the team and it rips away the fabric of how a team or a department works together. So actually you can't have more than 25% change within the team within, say, a couple of quarters. Otherwise, everything is going to start to fall apart. So that's one of the parameters that I always have.
Which is the first KPI, or the top 3 or 4, I don't know, or which is the main KPI that you start looking at the beginning to show, this is improving? And how much is the percentage of improvement? Just to understand a little bit the impact.
Yeah, so I will look at something that I call regrettable staff churn. So when I'm working with organizations, I'm very clear up front that when we're doing this piece of work, we are going to let some people go. Because the people that you had that got you to this point aren't necessarily going to be all the people that will get you to the next stage. And so the impact of the work that I do with them, one of the key metrics I look at is how we can reduce regrettable staff churn. Because we want to keep the people who have the right mindset, the right human skill sets that will get you to the next stage of growth. And so one of the key metrics on average that my clients will experience from working with me is a 23% reduction in regrettable staff churn. So we're going to be moving on some of the people who are frankly not right for this next stage of growth. Now that might be that they don't belong in that team, but they might be able to be moved sideways into another department. Or maybe actually they just aren't the right people for the next stage of the journey. And so that's one of the key metrics that we're looking at. One of the other metrics that I will be looking at is actually secondary ones. So the work that I do is very much in the kind of people and culture space. But then there are productivity metrics that organization will have. So that might be the recurring revenue. It might be customer retention. That might be that they need to be at, say, 95%, particularly for the SaaS companies and above, because actually that's how they're going to get the next stage of financing. So we're really looking at the key metrics for those organizations that will tell us that actually what we're doing is keeping the right people for the next stage of growth, protecting continuity, protecting net customer retention, and therefore protecting annual recurring revenue so that they have the predictability so that they can scale to the next stage. So like I say, it's very outcome focused. As the organizations are outcome focused, so am I with the work. And so I'm looking at actually, if you're saying you want to be this and you want to do this, I'm going to now work backwards all the way through the line, right from the people you hire to how you keep them, to how you promote them and how you reward them, that will now determine whether you actually have the right people on the bus to get you to that next stage of growth. And that does require some hard decisions to be made. But that's my job. As my clients call me their chief heart officer, I help them to do hard things, but I also do hard things with them. But I do them with love because I want to see my clients succeed. I want them to achieve their goals. I want them to achieve their growth. I believe that we can do this with great humanity. And that's why my company is called Humanity Works Consultancy, because I believe inherently in the power of human beings and the ingenuity and the creativity that they can bring to actually change the world. And I believe that we can do that.
Yeah, well, after doing all these changes in so many companies, of course, you have a big, belief in all of this. Now, when you told me about this topic when we were at the event at Google. I was quite excited because here in the UK, I've been working in small teams, some more consulting teams, management consulting, which is more, this is different, right? It's not like working in real industries like my background when I was director of operations, like in foreign industries, right? And I know it's working with people, making people, basically happy, I would say, like making, feel as at home, right? To be productive, improve quality of life. That was the big change that I did, like improve quality of life for them, but also I took very, difficult decisions. Once I had to shut down a factory, I had to fire 500 people. After convincing them to do many changes, like production lines, machines, new product, many things to try to save that factory. But the bit that was negative wasn't good, so in the end we had to shut it down, refurbish the factory and make a new one. And I did the same that you basically said. I had to keep only the good people, and let go the ones that were not going to fit the new culture or the new operating model. So I'm a people person too. So I'm a believer that like people are essential for everything, right? And moving a little bit into this market, because I don't know if you did this on purpose or not, but this is one of the largest economic segments in the world, with around 40 trillion economic activity. That's one of the reasons that you work with these companies, like from 100 million to 500 million, or just a coincidence?
There's a few reasons for it, actually. I think, when companies get to that 100 million stage, it's actually a really interesting phase of maturity. So a lot of the kind of scrappiness that you had in those early stages, the kind of informal networks, the family culture, they now move towards needing a lot more structure, a lot more systems, a lot more processes, a level of sophistication. You kind of need leaders now who move from being maybe just generalists to starting to bring in more specialists. You now need to have people who have more executive presence in your leadership team. And with that becomes a really interesting conundrum, because all of the things that made you great, it's not that we want to leave those things behind. I always say to people, yes, people are the heart of a business, but actually, if you really want to go from good to great, you need the right people for the right next phase of that journey. And I think that is I like solving complex problems. I always have. Throughout my career, even when I worked in really large global organizations, I was the person they brought in to build departments from scratch, to build entire functions and scale them. And sometimes it meant that I would scale them organically. Sometimes it meant that we would acquire other companies to bring in that capability that we needed. But all of it was really about creating something and creating systems and processes. And I've worked across from startups to the scale-ups to the really kind of multi-million pound businesses to the global billion-dollar businesses. But all of it comes down to people and having the right people working with you, having the right systems in place that will actually, for the stage of growth that you're in. And so I think it's a marriage of many different things. It's my unique capabilities, my experience, and where the market is right now. And I did choose tech very, very intentionally, not just because tech, obviously, are businesses that are often scaling very quickly. And so this actually makes a lot of sense for them. Technology is fundamentally shaping our world. These businesses are shaping our realities. And I want to bring that human lens and that human capability and put it front and foremost in these technology businesses, because we want them to shape a more rounded and better and more sustainable world for all of us. And so actually for me, this isn't just about a great kind of market opportunity. It's actually the opportunity to create a more human legacy. And I think in a world that's driven by AI, we need that more and more. So for me, it's many different reasons.
And well, everything is people, right? But now with AI, it's becoming a little bit complex because people think that you're going to get redundant and that everything's going to be automated and integrated. And there is a big, I would say I don't know how to say it, but there is people with fear, but at the same time, I think it's in the air, but it's not there yet as well. How are you managing those conversations with the C-suites and also with the, when they had to cascade down this to the workers, right? Or more like a, like a junior levels where they don't feel, nervous that they're going to lose their jobs.
But the reality is that people are going to lose their jobs. And at every point in time where we have had new technological innovations, people lose their jobs. Jobs that we had beforehand, we don't need them anymore. Things get sped up, things get changed. That's the evolution. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us that we upskill ourselves regularly, because work that we were doing beforehand often can be replaced by technology and by machines. I think AI is really speeding up that conversation. I think there is, though, I think there's something that we need to really be aware of here. AI can absolutely replace us, many different functions, 100%. I think some companies are using AI as an excuse for making wholesale cuts in the business because they want to protect revenue per employee. And they're using AI as a reason for that. But actually, it's not really about AI. It's because they're trying to just drive efficiencies across the business. So I think we need to be really mindful of that, because I think that narrative cannot be conflated with the fact that actually AI will replace jobs. AI replacing jobs doesn't have to be a terrible thing. Actually, maybe those jobs had a lot of grunt work in them. Maybe they were jobs that weren't making people feel particularly happy with the work that they were doing. I think that, we've got to have sensible and strategic conversations with leaders in organizations to understand, again, what is the outcome that you're trying to create, but also what is the path by which you want to get there. So organizations that have culture with high levels of trust have revenue that is like 4 to 5 times higher than companies that don't have it. Companies that have low kind of levels of trust and have toxic cultures, 45% of employees will leave those companies because of that toxic culture. So actually having strong kind of people frameworks, having strong cultures are ways in which companies can actually drive higher productivity, higher revenue, higher profitability. One of the interesting things that I'm seeing is that actually AI is, I think, making people recognize how important being human is. What AI does is it makes things homogenous. AI gives you the average of things. It makes everything seem the same. But interestingly, culture in an organization is probably one of the last things that makes your organization unique, because it's the sum total of the people in that organization and the way they operate and the way they behave and the way they interact with each other. It can't be replicated in any other organization. No matter how many times people put on the wall that they want integrity and they want blah-de-blah in their organization, the actual real culture of that organization is completely unique to you. One of the organizations I'm working with, they're a fintech business and they're at 200 million in revenue and they want to scale to the next level. And what we're doing there is we're actually changing the type of the people that they're bringing into the organization because of AI. So instead of hiring engineering grads in their engineering team, we're actually hiring creative grads because they want people who have a higher degree of sophistication in coming up with creative solutions to problems. They want people who have higher degrees of emotional intelligence so they can have more sophisticated conversations with clients where they're solving more complex problems. At the same time, we're bringing into that organization, into that department, a leader who has scaled a business previously from 200 million to 400 million, because they will bring the infrastructure and the structure and the processes that need to come into that team to be able to help those grads to be able to solve some of those problems. Now, it's not that we're losing all of the engineers from that team, but we are now recalibrating how that department will work as that organization moves to the next stage of growth, but also recognizes that a lot of the grunt work of the coding can actually just simply be done by AI, and they don't need that anymore. So models are shifting. I think it's about what you want to achieve and how you want to do it. And I think AI is actually making us appreciate what it is to be human. Actually, how you can drive more of that human ingenuity and creativity in your teams alongside leveraging technology like AI to make your business not just more efficient, but I would say more effective. And I think more companies now are moving, not just looking at efficiencies, but also looking at effectiveness. I think as AI gets stronger, it's telling us that actually being human is what sets us apart. And we would be wise, I think, to heed that.
Yeah, that's true. That has been happening at everything anyway. Like it happened with this revolution, the automotive industrialization, when everything was manual. Now everything is making by robots, right? So we adapt, and now we have to do it with AI, which is I think it's quite exciting anyway. I hope that one day AI can wash my dishes and like clean my flat and do all these things that don't add value, right? And studies suggest that leadership accounts for up to 70% of the variance in employment engagement. What do the best leadership teams actually do different?
That's a great question. I would say conflict. They handle conflict really well. They learn the art of disagreeing with other people without becoming disagreeable. And I think in the world that we're living in right now, we've got a real kind of comfort culture. We're living in a time where there's a lot of polarization that's happening in our world, outside of organizations, like in our society, in our culture. And that's spilling over into the workplace. And it's making it really hard for people to be able to express differences and still be able to learn to work together. The highest performing teams I work with, and that's been, my experience of working with kind of sports teams as well as within corporates as well, is that they are able to be able to put the collective goal of what they're trying to achieve, that collective success, above personal interest. And where you have a really strong leadership team that can do that, that is where you actually see an organization move exponentially faster up that scaling journey. In most organizations, when I come in, one of the first things I always note is that the leadership teams are often what I call a group of leaders. They are not a leadership team. They are people who are good and within their own functions, but they don't work together to be able to build the success for that organization. And often they are unable to express their differences in a healthy manner in order for them to be able to move forward. So a lot of the work that I often do, as a chief heart officer, when I go into these organizations, is really helping them to be able to develop those capabilities so that they can actually have clarity, so that they communicate better together, so that they have higher degrees of connection, and so that they have a collective goal of success that they're working towards. But a lot of what unlocks that is their ability to be able to have healthy conflict. And it's something that we have really lost as a capability along the way, along the generations.
Do you have a percentage in terms of how many companies have this problem? Do you have a rough number in your head about how this is happening in the market? Because this is something very common.
All of them, and it happens for different reasons. So when I am assessing cultures within organizations, I look at companies that have the kind of real family culture. So I'd call that the high connection, but low accountability. And there, everybody is protecting being nice and being cooperative. They're actually the most toxic cultures that I work in, because nobody's having the hard conversations. And then what happens is they allow people to stay in the organization that shouldn't be there, that drag down the performance from other people. And then people who should be staying in the organization, who are actually right to scale to the next level, they leave. And then you end up with this weird mishmash of people who are incredibly loyal to the organization, but wouldn't say boo to a ghost. And then, that doesn't actually help the CEO scale that business. And often the CEO is the one driving this. But equally, I've got the very kind of high accountability, so things are getting done, but low connection. People don't get along with each other. It's getting done in spite of it. But actually, the conflict is awful because it's like vile behavior. They're awful to each other. There's blatant shame. That's
the problem, that companies don't let go people when they have to, right? And they have to do, very rigorous, changes. When I was in this company, I mentioned that I had to let go 500 people. I had a very bad reputation because I fired so much people.
Yeah.
But it was the only way for me to change culture, to do what I want, and to, like basically do all the changes that I wanted. There were people working there for 45 years. They didn't want to do anything. And all the changes, that I did, it was because of, but I changed basically the culture. I had to let go people, and I started working with people. Right? Before, the director of operation was the god. He never went to the factory. He never talked to people. No one saw him, for example. Like that happened for years. It was the first time that I was the youngest director of history in the market.
Yeah.
It was the first time that in my company, it was a holding, that the director of operation was spending so much time in the factory actually talking to people, right? It was like, memorizing all the names, asking like with the problem they had, what was happening in the production lines, and then went to, the warehouses, talking with logistics, dispatch with fleets, retaking all the conversation with the suppliers, like integrating all the connections. And everyone who didn't want to change something is because actually they were doing something. They were stealing, or they had, was so many things happened, and I had to let go a lot of people. But the good thing that the board, everyone was aligned with my vision. I was very young, but they put me there because the same that I make things happen. I'm very pushy, and basically I resolve problems. That's what I do. And then when I move into other companies, like I would say global company, corporate, we had a very nice CEO, 60,000 people company, very nice CEO, principle, values, culture, website beautiful with all this big slogan. Everything was amazing. And when you hear the CEO was, my God, I want to be like this guy. This is amazing. But then when it started cascading down, there was a moment, there was a break. They tried to implement it, but in the end, they didn't feel the culture. I don't know, probably I would say easily 50% of the people were there for more than 20 years.
Oh, okay.
Or 15, so it was impossible to change it. They didn't want to change it, or even if they are were very fake, as you said, like asking you something or whatever, like you knew that they didn't want to change anything. And that's what I think, that's one of the main reasons why they are stuck now in growth. They obviously are a multi-billion company, but they don't grow. The only way they are growing now is by acquisition, right? By buying new companies. But actually growing their core business, I don't think that they're growing it that much because of that problem, because they don't do these changes. Even though they changed the board, they changed the C-suite, they changed a lot of the VPs, but then going cascading down, they didn't change everyone. And that was the big mass, right? Where everything has to change. You have to change the leadership team. That was sorry, I wanted just to talk about that experience.
And Mario, you've hit upon some really important points that actually, like I said in the beginning when I outlined the 4 steps to kind of building, this culture, I call it a culture operating system, because that's what cultures are. They're the operating system of your business. I mean, mine is called Stronger Together. So it's very much focused on building united cultures, building the trust, building the resilience within the organization. But it has to be systemized. It has to be systemized across an organization. It has to be role modeled, it has to be systemized, and it has to be operationalized. And like you say, sometimes that means you're the bad guy. But that's okay, because you're working towards a better outcome for everyone. And it's incredibly frustrating, and I fully understand the point you're making where that breaks down. And that's where you see a lot of resentment within organizations. That's where you see trust break down, because what it says on the website and the values that are on the wall, if that isn't your lived day-to-day experience of that business, then you're not going to believe anyone. And that is going to take away your impetus. Like people who work in high trust cultures, 60% of them, 60% of employees will go above and beyond for their company if they work in a high trust culture.
So you would say that the culture driver factor for a successful company in that level is trust?
Yeah, trust is really, really important. It's like the number one kind of growth driver. If you don't have that trust, what have you got, right?
That's true.
And you know, and it's interesting, you know, we talk a lot about, so one of the things I often get asked by leaders is, can you make my people more resilient? That's like the number one thing they come into me. They're like, make them tougher. Why aren't they as tough as they used to be? You know, that's something that we can get asked. And I always say to them, you know, resilience is something that is profoundly misunderstood. The US Army invested billions of dollars in resilience training for their soldiers. And when they assessed the soldiers afterwards, they found that they were no more resilient than before they had the training. The only ones that were the ones who yeah. The only ones that were the ones who worked in supportive units. So actually, resilience is actually driven by three things. Number one, control. Your ability to be able to control certain variables. Number two, community. Do you have the support around you? And the third element is identity. How strong is your sense of identity with the group of people that you're in? Now, when you put that into the context of an organization's culture, you cannot have any of those things. You cannot have resilience in the organization unless you have a culture of belonging, so strong identity, trust that fosters community, and agency where people have the ability to be able to control certain variables within their work or within their career. And that fundamentally means that if you want resilience in the organization, you have to have a strong culture of trust, which is why I created my model Stronger Together. Because for all of these organizations that are scaling, you're going to need your people to be resilient. But it's not going to happen unless you have that strong culture. Now, I'm a Liverpool fan, so a big football fan. And so it hurts me to say this, but when I was designing the Stronger Together operating system, it's actually inspired by Alex Ferguson, the Manchester United because when he in 1995 he put 6 teenagers on the pitch, and at the time people said he should have been sacked. Those teenagers went on to win the treble, right, in 1999. Now, he very quickly built a club that actually delivered really high levels of success. And one of the key ways that he did that was that he very rapidly built a united culture in that club, and that drove a fundamental part of their success. Yes, there were lots of other elements that go into it. And I hate to say it, but the model I designed, it was very much inspired by Alex Ferguson's work, because actually that united culture, that strength, that resilience that we draw from each other really comes from that trust that we have within that team and the organization that we're working in.
Well, yeah, I remember that time. Of Ferguson and what he did, a footballer as well. What he did was impressive, right? And now I think a lot of coaches, after him, started to do something similar. Guardiola as well, like in Barcelona, for example, and others, right? We are heading to the end of the episode. It's been a very good conversation. Before we finish, Sharon, we can continue talking for hours. You cannot imagine how many stories I have. I was in 4 industries. I was in food, retail, steel, and then transportation. Before I came into the UK 10 years ago, where I work in management consulting, and then tech. I am in tech now. Whoa, dude, operations is very fun. Which are like the, I don't know, I think lesson learned, so a few tips that you would like to provide to C-suites or the audience, that they're watching this video, this episode. Basically that, and how they can contact you.
Yeah, sure. Some tips I might give them is think about the outcomes of your business and what you want to achieve, and then reverse engineer your culture to match that. So if you say that you want to drive more innovation in the market, then make sure that you've got a learning culture in your organization that will enable your people to innovate much more. And think about actually how you can create that within the organization, and are you hiring the right people? So I always say to them, hire for will and for skill. Hire for mindset as well as the skill sets, because actually the hard skill sets by themselves aren't really going to be able to move the dial. If, for example, you've got an organization where you need people who have like high levels of agency and they need to be on it, then when you're doing the interview process, don't do a panel interview, where you ask people to come in and do a PowerPoint presentation, because what you're doing is you're testing people who are good performers in like an interview. That doesn't mean anything. Get them in for the day and put them through their paces with very minimal amounts of information and see whether that person sinks or swims. That will tell you whether that person is the right person to get you to the next level, because actually they will be the ones that can actually come in and change things and build things where, you know, systems don't exist. And I think that you have to be very strategic about who you hire, what is the culture you're creating, what are the systems you have in place, and how you're measuring success. Remember culture, the 3 levers that I said at the beginning when I defined culture. It is what you tolerate, it is what you reward, and it is what you promote. So think about those 3 things and then decide who you have on your teams, who you keep, who you let go of, who you have a very hard conversation with.
Yeah, exactly, because you can change a lot of people too. A lot of people can change. You don't have to let go everyone.
Exactly.
A lot of people can change.
Yeah. So we don't have to fire and hire everyone, but there is always an opportunity to be able to upskill people. And so I encourage you to really think about that. For anyone that wants to get in touch with me, you can go to my website, humanityworksconsultancy.com. I'm always on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn. My name is Sharon Palmer. I'm very easy to find there. And I look forward to hearing from people who listen to this brilliant podcast. And thank you, Mario, for this conversation.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a good end of the day, and enjoy the next days are going to be sunny. Cheers. Bye-bye.